What is up, people? Okay, so I said I would do this, and I'm a man of my word, so we're gonna do it. We're doing it, okay? Sorry, someone's walking by. Anyhow, all right. First off, before we begin, if you're watching this, you should also watch the video I made about actually writing TOK Essay. Otherwise, none of this, not none of this, but not a lot of this will make sense otherwise. So just keep that in mind. Go back and watch that. It's the video right before this if you're on my YouTube channel. Subscribe, not chasing clout. Just, you get the updates. There probably won't be any more that you need unless you're in IB history. Anyhow, so let's see. Oh, a couple things first. Here are my favorite places for getting examples for TOK essays and the like. So the first is called The Conversation. The Conversation is a website where university professors and other academics write short, succinct articles about a variety of different topics, news related or philosophical or otherwise. Aeon is another good is a very good website for a variety of different philosophical concepts that relate to theory of knowledge. Big Think does videos and articles that talk about a lot of things related to science and human sciences mostly, but you can get some history and mathematics in there as well. The Atlantic is just a news site. They publish a monthly magazine, but they usually have kind of philosophical ideas. And then The Guardian is a news site out of the UK that has a little bit more of a liberal leaning, but I find that they write interesting articles about a variety of topics. So you can check those out. The only one that has a paywall is The Atlantic. You get a certain amount of free ones per year, or month, I think. But if you run into problems, I do happen to be a subscriber, so I can get you something. Anyway, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do Title 1. So I put it right there. Is replicability necessary in the production of knowledge? Discuss with reference to 2 areas of knowledge. So what I would normally tell students to do is you got to break down all the things that you think are really, really important in here. So first off, this is probably the most important thing of the entire prompt, which is replicability. What does that mean? So I've told you, like in the last video, don't look up the dictionary definition. Think about what do you know about different academic disciplines and what do you think it means based on what you've heard or what you've seen. Okay. Necessary, which means necessary. So that would come from, if you want to get all straight up philosophical and rhetorical on this, and logical reasoning, you would have necessary and sufficient conditions. So necessary would indicate that it has to be there in order to produce knowledge. Okay. So that means that necessary, to me at least, from a rhetorical standpoint, means it needs to be there in the production of knowledge. So production, again, here, I don't know, sometimes they write these very specifically for specific reasons. They would make that the verb, or I guess it's a noun, production. No, you're producing. Anyway, so the creation. I mean, what are the synonyms of production? To create, to develop, possibly to share with others, potentially. That's not really a synonym, but things you do with things you produce. And then knowledge, obviously, you don't need to define knowledge, but it helps to have a working definition of how you're going to use that. And then discuss with reference to 2 areas of knowledge. This is very good. When you see discuss, you should be licking your chops like Pavlov's dogs, because that means that you don't need to necessarily take a hardcore stance on the prompts, not a to what extent question. You're just going to kind of discuss different viewpoints. So here's our possibilities here. So 1, we either say replicability is necessary. Oops. Replicability is not necessary. Or replicability is necessary. Whoops. That's not good. Don't say that. Is necessary in some, but not all cases. Okay. Now, obviously, this wouldn't be a TOK essay question if they're expecting you to talk about one of these. So we're probably going to be talking about this, so that it is maybe usually necessary, but not always necessary, or not usually necessary, but sometimes necessary. And it's probably going to be related to your 2 areas of knowledge that you pick. So again, your areas of knowledge are going to be natty sciences, sciences without steroids, human sciences, sciences with steroids, mathematics, arts, and history. Okay, so probably should pick some, and I don't know. My mind always goes in a lot of directions when I think about these, so it can be difficult sometimes. But let's tackle, before we get into this, let's tackle replicability, because we have to be able to define that. And to me, there's kind of 2 definitions that I would personally use for this. So replicability can be 2 things. Wow, it can be that for sure. Jeez. Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna use it 2 different ways. I'm gonna say, one, it can refer to replication, which means repeating methodology and procedures for the development of knowledge in a discipline. Okay. And that's what most people go to if you've taken like a science class. Man, I cannot type today, or I'm typing too fast. And that's good. Replication means reliability. In psychology, we talk about that a lot. Like, in order to create reliable knowledge in psychology, you should be able to replicate. If you do an experiment and you say these are our conclusions, you should be able to replicate that and do it over and over again and get the same results or similar results. Same thing like a survey, something like that. And then the other thing, I got really excited about that. The other thing is replication can also be the ability to share or basically spread access to certain ideas. Okay, so I would use these both ways. You can replicate knowledge by your ability to share it, from going personal to shared knowledge. So this is a key concept in TOK, which is personal knowledge to shared knowledge. How do we do that? It also can relate to truth. So like what is truth? How do you develop truth? How do you develop facts? Things like that. So that's how I would use it. Then this is how again, these are just me using examples of how I would do it. You don't need to do this, and it's not going to be comprehensive. And I'm also just doing it literally off the top of my head right after lunch. And I'm trying the best I can to figure out how much time I have left. Oh my gosh, we don't have a lot of time. So we have about 7 minutes to do this. So here's what I'm going to do. I feel like it really depends, right? Like sometimes these are too alike to one another to really draw a good comparison. But these would be biology, chemistry, physics. Okay, that's where we want to stay. And again, these are different. These are going to have different necessities for replication depending on what they are. Human sciences, it seems more and more every year that kids don't actually know what this is. So this would be like political science, psychology, sociology, economics. What am I missing? Oh, anthropology. History is history, math is math, arts can be any type of fine arts. So I feel like either one of these is good, but I don't necessarily want to do 3. I think I'm going to do history. I think history is a good one because everyone messes history up. Okay. All right, cool. So here's some ideas I have for human sciences. A spitball. I'm not going to even use all of them. I'm not going to make it into paragraphs. I'm just saying, here's some ideas. So there's this thing called the replication crisis in social sciences. Human sciences, social sciences, like same thing. So what does that mean? Google it. You can find a lot of different examples of things that did not repeat. So I guess the question is like, in order to have knowledge, human sciences must experiments or research replicate. Okay, now there's a couple examples of this. I would say, yeah, there's probably a lot of examples of how this is an issue and how we can't really say for sure that we have real, actual knowledge if we can't replicate it in the real world. However, there are certain types of, if we think about sharing knowledge or the ability to spread knowledge or go from personal to shared, there's a lot of examples. So yes, most of the time, with like experiments and surveys and correlations potentially, right? Not necessarily with things like case studies in human science. If you're going to study one specific example, I think about in psychology, we talked about something like conjoined twins that are conjoined at the head and what you can learn and what you can conclude about that and share that amongst the population. That's a very specific case that probably can't be easily replicated and definitely not ethically replicated, which makes me also think about ethics. I can bring that in there as well. So not necessarily if you think about specific case studies. So I might talk about maybe an example of how a experiment in human sciences, particularly psychology, was not able to be replicated and how that really put a damper on our understanding and our knowledge that we were able to build. But I might also give an example of a case study specifically where it was a one really specific obscure example that is hard to replicate, but maybe that we can still draw conclusions on and why that is, because that's what we really want to think about is why can we draw conclusions from case studies if we can't replicate them. So maybe that's in my example, not necessarily. Let me do a quick time check, even though it's not going to really even matter at this point. Yeah, I got to hurry up. So I might go into human sciences, kind of think about that. And then for history, I might use replication a little bit differently. Now, the big thing about history is this, and if there's nothing else in the next 4 minutes, I want to make sure that you understand history. It's not about the actual events. Like, yeah, we can't replicate the events in history, and that's important. But history is about like the question we ask in the area of knowledge of history is how do we know what we know about the past? Okay, because history is really it's a story we tell based on sources and evidence. And that's what we want to really be focusing on if you're going to use history. People use history incorrectly all the time. So I might want to think about certain things with replication. I like to think about a lot about like oral history versus written history. Like a lot of history is passed down orally. Even if you think about like your family's history, for example, you can use your own examples. Is passed down orally. A lot of cultural history is passed down orally. Like we can't necessarily, that's not like based on written sources. We can't replicate the methodology. If you say like, hey, how can I replicate your development of that oral history? It's not, you can't do that. You have to talk to the same people, but the people that you talk to are going to have, they can't replicate those methodologies. It's just, that is the story that they know, right? Versus written history where we can replicate, you can look at the same sources over and over and over and over again. However, so I would say like, not replicable versus replicable. The other thing I like to think about a lot is interpretation of sources and language, right? So like, how can you ensure that the same person is going to interpret the same source the same way all the time? And they're not going to focus on different things. Or if it's language, if there's a translation error, or how language changes over time. So if you want to think about a theme, the themes aren't required in the TOK essay, but you can bring in that theme of knowledge and language, or knowledge and technology. Like as we develop more technology to hang on to historical artifacts, is our knowledge getting better because we can replicate those sources, or is it getting worse because we have too much information? Those are all just things that I think about. I also think about like bias and like who owns historical knowledge. So, for example, there are countries like China where they literally rewrite the textbooks and the history every so often so that the government knows that the history that people are getting is the history they want told. So, that's not how replication works. Like that's sharing knowledge in a way that is dishonest. So you're replicating knowledge in a dishonest way. So does that actually create knowledge, even though it's definitely replicable if it's been completely biased? I would say no. So that's kind of like, that's like a little brainstorming session that I would kind of set it up. So I would talk about not human sciences a little bit this way. And I notice I'm using replication a certain way. And then I would use replication a different way for history and talk about how we know what we know about the past and how we can replicate it. So I hope that doesn't make things more confusing. I know it's just kind of me spitballing a little bit. But that's kind of like how I would think about it and the types of things that I would look for. And then I would set it up as my first discussion about human sciences, my second discussion about history, maybe do a little comparison at the end, talk about what I learned from the process. And that's it. So hopefully this is helpful. If you want to talk about it, let me know. Otherwise, hopefully this is good.